Ladies and gentlemen, Big Harry News.
Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hero News. How are you all? I'm sure you're very, very well. Thank you for joining us tonight, and be nice to each other in the chat. Thanks very much. Tonight is a special Friday night long-form interview show. So this is a pre-recorded show for those of you who are just tuning in on one of the YouTubes or video platforms in the time that we're broadcasting it. But I had a chance today to speak to Sam Seder, and Sam Seder is the kind of person that you get a chance to speak to. You make it work because it's a really, really interesting character. If you don't know Sam, and most of you probably will, he's a political commentator out of the US, a very large YouTube channel called The Majority Report with Sam Seder, currently 1.6 million subscribers, and they do shows every day live as well. They're kind of taking our model and running with it, or maybe the other way around. So yeah, a fantastic conversation about with Sam Seder for the next 40 minutes or so. Apologies from the start that we didn't get a chance to ask the questions that came in. Basically, I realized, of course, when you're talking to a podcaster, and I was literally looking at the time, we were aiming for about 30 minutes. I think we do about 38 or 39. And I asked Sam my first question, my list of questions here, the first question, and that answer to that finished at 15:15, so 15 minutes later. So there wasn't time. I apologize. I think some of the themes that you guys asked about in the questions we got to anyway. Thanks to all our patrons. If you like what we do, if you want to support what we do, if you want to be a part of us, then all you need to do is head to patreon.com/Big Hairy News. And because at the time of recording, I haven't yet edited the show together, if I was to show you this next, the first recent post would be the Sam Seder conversation. So patrons will get early access to the Sam Seder conversation. And if you want to be a part of what we do, if you enjoy us, you want to support us, help us pay a few bills here and there, then head to patreon.com/Big Hairy News. All right, team, no more messing around. Let's get into it with Sam Seder. Well, welcome to the show, Sam Seder from The Majority Report. Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Pat, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I was just looking actually, almost to the day 4 years ago. There you go.
Right.
Almost to the day. October 2020.
That's amazing. I look much younger than I do now. You look exactly the same.
Well, I look 50 kilos heavier. Let's not be aware of that. That's all right though. So yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you look better. Let's put it that way.
Oh, thanks. And funnily enough, over the ages, my beard has got less grey. I don't know how that happens, but you know, it just happens these days.
I would like to sign up for that.
Hey, obviously, we want to talk to you about the American election coming up. You guys do a show every day of the week, 2.5 hours. That includes call-ins as well. I've seen the little tagline on the end of your clips there. What are your thoughts today? What are we, 12 days out, 13 days out your time from the US election? Where are we all sitting?
Yeah, we're 12. I mean, there's been some controversy about how we count this on my show. We're probably 11 days and 10 hours or 12 hours, as it were. Yeah, I wish I had a more definitive answer for you.
Yeah.
But you know, I vacillate now. It's almost like down to like every 5-10 minutes. You know, while I'm scrolling through things, but I can give you a sense of like, you know, where we are relative to what the two theories of victory are for both sides. And I choose to be somewhat optimistic, But, Trump's campaign is really focused on motivating low propensity voters, as defined by how often they voted over the last 3 elections.
Yeah.
They believe there is a significant number of low propensity voters who are going to come out and vote for them. I'm not quite sure why, but the idea is they're going to motivate them by, talking about how immigrants are bad and women are bad to some extent, and that crime is up there. I mean, they're trying to trigger, male low propensity voters to come out and vote. And Harris, on the other hand, believes that there's a lot of votes to be found, or at least the winning coalition is to be found in disaffected Republicans who may have, voted with some enthusiasm in 2016 for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And maybe held their nose or voted for Biden in 2020. And this time they think that number is larger. It's her strategy. I mean, that's her strategy. It's not the strategy I would follow. I don't like it for a couple of reasons. One is I think you're shedding other votes, on the left on some level. I mean, I really think to the extent that anything is specifically hurting Harris, aside from the fact that, like, I don't think she's the greatest candidate, as it were, but I don't know how much that matters. I think she's done a good job. I don't know that she could have done this if she had been running the entire time, but in a 3-month period of time, which is basically what she had, right? She became the candidate in August, September, October, ends in November. She did a good job, it seems to me, in not making, in avoiding the trap that Hillary Clinton did in, saying this is going to be a historic election. I mean, if she wins, it's going to be historic for this country.
Sure.
But you never, ever hear that in the conversation. And that is, I think, a conscious decision by the Harris campaign, because they don't want to, we have a lot of people who have racist feelings in this country. A lot of people have misogynist feelings in this country. They don't want to trigger that. And, the Republicans went to that for the first, month, essentially, and because they couldn't help themselves. And they sort of have learned since then not to do that. But the thing that's really, I think, hurting her is her not breaking, rhetorically at least, from what the Biden administration is doing in terms of Israel and Gaza. Because, well, first off, there's a 25-point difference in the polling where Arab Americans are versus how they voted for Biden and Clinton.
Yeah.
Biden won that by almost 25 points, I think. Same with Clinton. And Trump is up by a point or two. That can make a big difference in Pennsylvania and Michigan. I mean, I assume your audience knows that this race is going to come down to 6 or 7 states. Yeah. And, people forget this. Joe Biden did quite well relative to the Electoral College. I think he had 306 electoral votes off the top of my head. 270 is what you need to win.
Yep.
But people don't really realize that if you took away 40,000 votes from across like 3 or 4 states, spread out across those 3 or 4 states, this is an election where 30 million, 40 million people could be voting, and 40,000 votes over the course of 3 states, it could have gone the other way.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
It's terrifying. And so, the Arab Americans in Michigan and in Pennsylvania could, just as a first order problem, losing that vote could be a problem. But I think there's a second order problem that I think is underestimated. And that is, it depresses the activists, and it depresses young people, because
But do you
I
think
mean,
there'd be a calculation there? Because obviously, if they, I mean, we like the guys who watch this show, and we all agree with you about the change of direction on the Israel-Gaza situation. Do you think they're going, how many would we lose versus how many would we gain? Is this just a calculation game, or is
yeah,
this their
I
pure
do.
politics and where they sit?
Well, I do think, I mean, I think they probably do both, right? Like,
Yeah,
but I definitely think that, I mean, look, it's very, very difficult and almost unprecedented. Humphrey did it with LBJ and breaking away from the Vietnam War, but there was you had Americans fighting in that war,
yeah,
right? Like, I mean, you had people that you knew who were often fighting in
yeah.
Vietnam, and he
Children,
broke
brothers,
very late,
sisters,
and
etc.
it's very, very, very rare
Yeah,
that a vice president will break from a president, in this context. I mean, we don't have a ton of them, but I mean, Bush, when he ran after Reagan, and Gore, even like with the whole Clinton thing, sort of like just had to do it sort of, sort of slyly, just to break away from the fact that he got, a blowjob in office or whatever. I think it's very difficult for her to do. I think it's very difficult for her to do based upon Biden stepping aside.
mm-hmm.
And I suspect, I have marginal evidence for this, that she's going to change policy. I don't know that it's going to be a radical change, but it's going to be enough, I think, when she gets in office. But putting that aside, I think, A, they know that's very difficult to do. B, I think they probably think it's a break-even, proposition.
Right.
They may be right, they may be wrong, but I suspect that they think it's a break-even proposition, because there may be, more, conservative-oriented Jews in Pennsylvania and Michigan, maybe. But I do think what they probably are afraid of is not so much the trade-off in votes if they were to, come out with something that was a little bit more forceful.
Mm-hmm.
I think their campaign has been about, do not make this about you, make it about Trump. And as soon as like the story is she's breaking from Biden, in a significant way. I mean, let's look how she's actually, like, how's your administration going to be different than Biden's? And it's been such like sort of, pablum. And she doesn't want to say that she's not her own person, but she also doesn't want to say like, he didn't, he did something wrong or something. So it's all been sort of like, I think, had she broken from Biden, it would have been a major bone that the media would have gnawed on over and over and over again. And I still think that, I don't know. It's hard for me to sort of divorce my perspective on this with like some type of cold analysis, because I don't know if there's really any raw, data, hard data to make this assessment. I think that she could have weathered that, and I think it would have maintained a certain like enthusiasm. And I think there was a lot more room for Biden, although I think he's just, he's given over his foreign policy to some real, hardcore neocons. But I think there's been plenty of room for Biden, at least in terms of like the Democratic coalition, to have been far more aggressive, or aggressive at all, or in any way curbed Israel. I think there was plenty. I mean, we've seen this time and time again. Almost every U.S. president, short of George W. Bush, and even to a certain extent George W. Bush, have functioned to put the brakes on Israel's worst impulses.
Yeah.
Those impulses have gotten a lot worse over the decades, frankly. But we saw it with Reagan telling Begin to knock it off in Lebanon. We saw it with Clinton bringing people together for a peace accord. George W. Bush basically made a deal with Israel, like, chill out when we go to war with Iraq, have patience, but then turned around and basically said, we'll support your your unilateral leaving from Gaza. I mean, I think Barack Obama, from my perspective, he didn't do much in terms of engaging with that region, but he was the most sort of like he created the most friction between Israel and the United States. And his number one national security guy also, not coincidentally, is Kamala Harris's number one national security guy. And so that's where I have like some encouragement that she's going to do this after the election. But I think they made a political calculation beforehand that it would be too costly. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't agree with it, but I don't know how, frankly, how sensible my assessment is, because I think it's really colored by how horrible the U.S. policy is.
Yep.
I will say I do have concerns that the way that she's campaigning is going to influence the way that she governs. And I'm not talking just about foreign policy, but she's fashioning a constituency that involves at least some Republicans. And suddenly the people who voted for you, now she could win in some, major, what we would call in this day and age, a landslide. And maybe, that she has enough voters to spare in terms of like, over the course of the 4 years. But my sense is, I just remember Chuck Schumer saying in 2016, he said two things that still sort of resonate and I, wake me up at night. One is, he said, for every blue collar vote we lose in Pittsburgh, we're going to pick up two votes outside the suburbs of Philadelphia. Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, obviously, two cities in Pennsylvania. Again, Pennsylvania is really the key state. It's hard to imagine Harris winning without winning Pennsylvania. And then he also said at one point, and people don't remember this one as much, in October, we had long story short, there was a lot of U.S. money that was being kept in corporate coffers offshore, because if they bring it back to the United States, they had to pay, I don't know, remember exactly what it was, but let's just call it a 25% tax on it.
Sure. George
W. Bush did a one-time moratorium. You only have to pay 5% in what they called the American Jobs, Act. And it turned out those companies that actually lobbied for this repatriation cut jobs. But so, since 2005, there was growing dollars that were offshored that were just sitting out there waiting for another Republican to come in and give a low, like a tax break to repatriate it. And Schumer said in October, somebody had asked him about this. Schumer had this idea for a grand sort of like deal where that money comes back at like, instead of a 5% rate under Bush, or a 25% rate as to what it should have been, maybe it was 12%. And the idea was that money, though, was going to be earmarked for big infrastructure, which, Biden ended up doing, 6 years later. But Schumer's quote was, I've got Clinton, I've got Schumer. I don't know why he spoke about himself in the third part. And I've got Ryan. Speaking of Paul Ryan, who was then the former vice presidential candidate for Mitt Romney and the Speaker of the House, Republican Speaker of the House. And when he said that, it became clear to me why the Clinton campaign was not attacking Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and making them own or disavow Donald Trump. They like it looked like Mitch McConnell had taken a vacation, from like the time that the RNC had happened until the election. Like he had just disappeared. Same with Paul Ryan. It's almost like they just completely receded so deeply into the background. And that was because the Democrats didn't say like, hey, what do you guys agree with this? Ask Paul Ryan, grab him by the pussy. I mean, whatever it was they could have done, but they didn't want to do that. And I think part of that was because and I think part of the reason why they were looking for those voters in the suburbs is they were looking to bring along those people to make this big grand bargain deal. And they, politicians fashion, their their constituency, not just for elections, but also to give them support, and which disciplines, members of Congress, throughout their presidency. And so that makes me nervous. I mean, it makes me nervous that that's part of her strategy. I mean, I would not be terribly shocked if she was to the left, to the liberal, whatever you want to say, a little bit better than Joe Biden on foreign policy, but a little bit worse on domestic.
It seems like you're saying she's doing what she needs to do to try and win.
Well,
I wonder, though, in the last 12 days leading up to the election, what's the one or two things she needs to do to win? But equally, what's the one or two things that Trump needs to do to get over the line and win?
Well, I mean, I think they all do what they think they need to do to win, right? I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean they are doing what they need to do to win. And, at this stage, the die is cast. Like, I think she should have run a different campaign starting at the DNC. She had it. She had captured lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
And, the whole Republicans are weird thing, they made a conscious decision to stop that, even though it was like wildly successful. And
the Cheney's, like singing the praises of the Chinese being
100%.
Like on their side now.
It's
like
grotesque.
You could say, this is how bad the Republicans are. These people who we don't like and we never have, and we're even them, the ones we're not liking, are not going to vote for that guy. We don't want them to be involved, but look how bad they are, and they're too, and Trump's too bad for them. Now let's move on by ourselves without them on stage with us.
Their theory is, let's get the most horrible of Republican villains and have them come out and say, I'm not voting for Trump, and that giving a certain percentage of Republicans license to vote for Harris. If Dick Cheney's going to vote for Harris, I mean, I understand their theory. It may work, and I hope it does, because I think it would be an absolute disaster for this country if Donald Trump becomes president, not just because of Donald Trump, but because of the Republican Party. So, in answering like what they need to do from now until the election, it's really more a function of like what they've set up the table. Right. I mean, they it's not like Harris can go run in the way that I want her to. I do think, however, if she came out and said, my policy on Israel and Gaza is if she had, even if like, we will follow the law, and we will do another review on day one. We will do a review that will last 7 days of Israel's the way that they're waging this, and we will follow the law. I mean, I think almost that would be something that would indicate like, but I don't think she's going to do that. Because I just don't think that that's what their strategy is. I think the big thing that they need to do is it's motivating. It's all a ground game now. I mean, this is the one thing that really gives me hope. Like, I don't know if she's pursuing the right strategy. I mean, listen, I had people on my show who told me 3 days before the election in 2016 that Hillary Clinton has a 97% chance of winning. And and I was like, okay. But the get out the vote operations are what I look at now. And, even then it's also very difficult to assess. There are more Republicans who have come out to vote early in Pennsylvania than in 2020, but that was because it was an explicit strategy by the Trump campaign to not have them come out. But Democrat early voting numbers, even though that they were going to shift to more election day work, seems to be holding up to 2020 numbers. And so that's a good sign. There are, like I say, depending on which, is it the top of the hour or is it the bottom of the hour? And I can tell you that my optimism swings back and forth. It's just, I'm looking at the early breakdowns of early voting in like Michigan and Pennsylvania, and they appear to be good, but I just don't know. We've been living in an era that has been every time, almost every election we've had has been unpredictable in some way or another. So like, for instance, 2018 off year election, we had the highest, both the Republicans and the Democrats had off the charts numbers for voter participation in an off year election. It just so happens that the Democrats had a more off the charts, a record breaking, I'm talking decades and decades.
But that's also thanks to Trump, isn't it? That's an activation because of Trump that they wanted to push back.
It's all. I think a lot of it is negative partisanship.
Right.
But then we have abortion as an issue, and I just, this is the first time in, really arguably ever in the history of the United States that an individual right that was found to be, a constitutional right was taken away after 50 years.
Yeah.
We had instances like post-Reconstruction of the Civil War where Supreme Courts curbed Black people from voting, even though ostensibly they had gotten the vote in the series of the Reconstruction amendments to our Constitution, but nothing this explicit. So it's really difficult. And it's also difficult to assess because you look at national polling. I think Trump is doing better with constituencies that aren't necessarily going to help him. So he may be doing better with conservatives in New York State, for instance.
Yeah.
Or in California than he had done last time. But those two states are not going to go in his column. But it makes his national numbers look better. And, it doesn't explain the state polls, but, right now with the way that Republicans have figured out, like, a lot of these places do averaging of polls. So if we just put out a bunch of like bullshit polls, we're going to impact that. So I'm also less inclined to believe than I used to that people decide how they're going to vote based upon these polls. Like, I think Hillary Clinton suffered, among the many, many reasons she lost. And I would say, like, honestly, I could probably off the top of my head still, even now, 8 years later, name, half a dozen really concrete reasons why she lost. But I think one of them was she's going to win. Yeah. So, it's not as dire of a circumstance. I can maybe vote for somebody else, or I can maybe blow it off.
Yeah. And also activating the other side. What do you think she's going to win? We better get out and vote as well.
Oh, I think the hatred towards Hillary Clinton was also sort of like sui generis in this country. They had 30 years of people literally making a living off of, saying that she had murdered one of her aides and dragged their body to a park in Washington, D.C. This is what Rush Limbaugh was saying for 20 years. And there's a lot of reasons to be critical of Hillary Clinton. I don't think she killed that person. So
I like it how you say you don't think. You can't absolutely confirm or deny.
Listen, I am not I wasn't involved. I wasn't that closely involved. So I'll give myself a little wiggle room.
Hey, Sam, let me ask you this. Looking at around the world, including here in New Zealand, and I've heard Cenk Uygur say this a few times, that people vote for change. Like in New Zealand, we had an incredibly successful COVID run under Jacinda Ardern, and enough cookers and, opponents got into that to say, our rights, our liberties, I couldn't buy a coffee, and it worked. The messaging worked, and they voted for change, and we now have a right-wing racist government running this country. I look to the UK, vote for change, those sorts of things. If that was to participate, if that was to show itself in America, of these two candidates, who would be the vote for change?
Yeah. Yes, you're right. Like, that's the question. I don't, it's unclear. her campaign started off with two things. They're weird.
Yep.
Speaking of the Republicans, which I thought was
Which
actually
worked.
the first time. I mean, it's so fascinating that they decided to go against it. I mean, it was all the Biden people, but it's so fascinating that they decided to go against that, because it really, I mean, maybe they felt like youth voters aren't going to come out, but it really resonated with young people, because the Republicans are weird in the way that they're anachronistic. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
You know, you had Tucker Carlson just at the yesterday. There was, I'm sure you maybe have seen this clip where he's talking about like how Trump is like daddy who's come home to spank the teenager daughter who has been naughty.
If you allow people to get away with things that are completely over the top and outrageous, if you allow your 2-year-old to smear the contents of his diapers on the wall of your living room, and you do nothing about it, if you allow your 14-year-old to light a joint at the breakfast table, if you allow your hormone-addled 15-year-old daughter to like slam the door of her bedroom and give you the finger, you're going to get more of it. And those kids are going to wind up in rehab. It's not good for you, and it's not good for them. No. There has to be a point at which dad comes home. Yeah, that's right. Dad comes home. And he's pissed. Dad is pissed. He's not vengeful. He loves his children. Disobedient as they may be, he loves them. Because they're his children, they live in his house. But he's very disappointed in their behavior. And he's going to have to let them know. He's going to have to get to your room right now and think about what you did. And when dad gets home, you know what he says? You've been a bad girl. You've been a bad little girl, and you're getting a vigorous spanking right now.
I mean, this is weird. This is weird, really fundamentalist religious stuff. That's what it is. Yeah. And but the other aspect, the other thing they had going for them is we're not going back. Yeah. And apparently the Biden people who took over a campaign also said, no, don't do that.
Yeah, because that was strong messaging. I mean, you know, hearing Tim Walz on stage the other day talking about Trump's running mate, Elon Musk, strong messaging. He's a dipshit jumping on. Yeah. That strong messaging.
But you know what? What he's saying? He's saying that Elon Musk is weird.
Yeah,
I mean, that's exactly. The funny thing is that like he can't help himself because he knows what's connecting with people. Yeah. And the thing that I find just bizarre about why they abandoned, we're not going back does not roll off the tongue when you're chanting it.
Yeah. But
what it does do, and this is why I find it really surprising that the whoever came in and took over a campaign had a problem with it. It does remind you that like, wait, Trump's a retread. Trump is a retread. And, Harris, at least in terms of the way they code, you look at Biden and you look at Harris. And, a lot of people, the people who are, undecided, except for maybe, these wayward Republicans, if they exist, I'm not convinced they do.
Right.
But people who are undecided, who consider themselves, apolitical or independent or whatever they call, they're not assessing change based upon policy. Mm-hmm. They're not. They're assessing change based upon like, sort of very, what you and I might consider very, very superficial things. They may be meaningful to these people, but I mean, you and I would say like, that has nothing to do with politics. But if old white guy, youngish black woman, I mean, that looks like a change, and yet they also don't want to focus on her. So making it about, we're not going back. What does that literally say? It literally says, he represents not a change. And, you know, that way you keep the focus on him.
Yeah.
But you also sort of imply that you are the only one to represent any type of change, any type of going forward. So I don't know. I thought that was pretty effective, if not, you know, wasn't necessarily the greatest wordsmith stuff. This is, you know, we're not, this is not literature, but I thought it was effective, but we'll see. You know, I mean,
doesn't quite sit like the MAGA on the cap. It's not quite as effective as the MAGA on the cap, and
or si se puede, or whatever it is. You know, yes, we can. I mean, there's, you know, I like Ike. I mean, you know, this is not roll off the tongue, but
thanks so much for giving us some time today. I've got a couple of super quick questions just to wrap
Sure.
up with, if that's okay. Elon Musk's influence and the $1 million he's given away. What are your thoughts around that? $1 million a day.
He paused the $1 million today because the Department of Justice said, "Hey, what you're doing
news.
Looks, at least on its face, like illegal. You're not supposed to induce people to register to vote." I mean, he has poured in. I'm convinced when we we're going to understand over the course of the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to understand that he probably poured in anywhere from $200 to $300 million into this race in various ways.
And my God, imagine what he's going to turn into should Kamala win. Like, you've got Trump, they stole the election. Imagine what fucking Elon Musk will turn into.
Twitter's going to be just a fucking sewer. I mean, somebody should bring back an RSS feed, and let's just you know, in this instance, let's go back 10 years and just get rid of Twitter. But I think it's extraordinary. The only thing I will say is that, like I say, get out the vote is really important. Elon Musk is running he's running the get out the vote in like 3 or 4 major states through his super PAC. And my experience of like when people who don't know what they're doing come into an industry, they get rolled more often than not.
Right.
And so, and then there were reports that like they found like a week or two ago that at least in Nevada and Arizona, we're not sure about the other states, they found that their own paid canvassers were lying 25% of the time as to whether they had knocked on doors. Because they carry around an app that gives their GPS coordinates, and the logs showed, hey, wait a second. You say you just knocked on 23 Maple, but you're over at 14 Littleton Lane, which is like the Chipotle restaurant. How is that possible? And apparently they found, like, you know, they had this problem. And, you know, my experience is that like when you pay people to do this type of work, and you rely this much on money, people, you know, scammers attract scammers. That's how they maintain their thing. And it's the
opposite of a grassroots movement. Something can be said about it. It's the AstroTurf movement.
And you know, people cut corners in you know, when it's all just it's only for the money. So I think he could end up being hoisted on his own petard, as it were, which would be wonderful. In fact, I think the best chance that Harris has is really a function of how poor Trump's ground game may actually be. We'll see.
The other quickie is Joe Rogan. It's Friday in New Zealand at the moment, obviously Thursday in the US. So tomorrow, our time, Trump said to be going on Joe Rogan. I think it's all confirmed. Will that be a net positive or a net negative for Trump, do you think?
Oh my God. I think the only negative for Trump could be the chafing he feels from the tongue bath that Joe Rogan will give him. I think he will walk out of there maybe, you know, with just different parts of his body feeling a little chapped with how much Joe Rogan provides him with softballs. I mean, and you know, Rogan will question him on some stuff, but he won't follow up particularly well, and he will enjoy Trump so much it'll be interesting to see. The real test will be if Rogan has Harris on. That will be fascinating to see.
You don't think there's any chance that Rogan will be so comfortable he'll open the door to, I mean, Trump does this anyway. He says the quiet things out loud, but even more so. So maybe he doesn't get the positive on Rogan, but I mean, he gets the positive on Rogan, but the rest of the media are able to point out some things. You think that's not going to, no chance of that happening?
Well, that could happen, but I mean, you know, like what more do you need? I mean, you just had, I mean, you know, in terms of the strategy for Harris, right?
Yeah.
Her whole strategy is geared towards getting suburban Republicans. And, you know, they just had John Kelly, who was Trump's chief of staff. He was a former general in the U.S. Army. He was head of Homeland Security under Trump at the beginning. John Kelly is a piece of garbage, in my estimation. He is a horrible human being whose immigrant policies were just despicable. Fascistic, I think. And he's come out and saying that that Trump would wax poetic about how good things were under Hitler, and that Hitler, I want generals like Hitler had.
Yeah.
Not knowing apparently that it was generals that attempted to kill Hitler towards the end of the war. But, and, you know, and if that doesn't do it, you know, Donald Trump going like, yeah, I like girls, of course, on Joe Rogan or whatever it is that Rogan's going to get him, you know, to say, it's not going to make a difference. You know, it's not going to motivate anybody to vote against Trump, in my estimation. It may motivate people to go out and vote for Trump, but we'll see.
Just in one sentence, one word even, who wins, Trump or Kamala?
Don't know.
Okay, very good. That's 2 words. Well done. This is the only question I really want to ask you. It doesn't require a lot of feedback, but thank you for your time. Imagine you've got the most salacious, the best bit of news / gossip, whatever you want to call it, about either Dave Rubin or Tim Pool. The best bit of goss in the history of the world, the thing that you most wanted to share, and one of them's Dave Rubin, one of them's Tim Pool. You have a bit of a love affair with these guys, but you've only got time on your show to share one of those bits of news. Which one do you share? It's the real question at the end of the interview, Sam.
You know, that's a good question, and I'll tell you why it's difficult for me to answer. First off, I'm going on Tim Pool's show a week.
I know.
It turns out I'm going.
You sound very
I thought it was going to be
enthusiastic about
canceled,
that.
but I mean, I have the day off today. My producer was out of town the past week, so I'm like, have you heard anything? They apparently heard me on my show saying like, I don't know what the deal is, and yesterday, and they reiterated that I am actually there. Here's the thing. I don't care about either one of these guys.
Right.
And the way I would make this decision is which one is more relevant. And I think probably, but I don't know, with Tim Pool pulling back like this, you know, they both got hurt, I think, severely with this lack of Russian money. I suspect Tim Pool more so than Rubin. And because I think Tim Pool thought like, oh, this is the opportunity for me to expand my business. And I think he, you know, when he started crying, like I needed a CEO, that to me sounds like somebody who got an influx of several $1 million. And said like, oh, I'm going to launch a skateboard company. I'm going to go buy a skateboard park. I'm going to go, but I'm going to go increase my operating costs. Like, you know, like you and I are small, you know, small operators, I think. And I think Rubin, I get the sense, is also operates, you know, I think his husband is his producer or was, and I think he doesn't have that much overhead. I get the sense that Tim expanded his company significantly. 30 people is a lot of people on staff. Particularly based upon what they turn out. And I think you don't complain about your staff being lazy unless you feel like you're paying too much money out the door relative to what's coming in, right? Like, you know, if I'm making money, I'm looking around at my, my staff and I'm going like, I don't give a shit, whatever, like we're fine, don't, whatever, don't do.
So he's overstretched himself, you think, financially based on the Russian money, and that's an issue for him.
I think so. And so, but I still think probably Tim Pool is more, relevant than Rubin these days. So I would probably say Tim Pool, but I try and be joyful about these things, on my show. But the fact of the matter is, I could care less about either one of them. All I care about is making it harder for them to do what they think they are doing.
Yeah,
that's all. Well, I care about.
Sam, if indeed the empire does fall in 11 days, I've got a spare bedroom down here in the bottom of the South Pacific. You're welcome to crash anytime you want to get away.
Pat, that's why I do the show, because if I, on the run, I need to have connections, across the globe. And, you're the one I got in New Zealand. So
done, sold. I've got a spare bedroom, just
I'm
building
holding
your bathroom.
I'm
right
holding
beside
you to that.
Hey, dude, thanks so much for joining us. I love your content. Congratulations on the show. It's I watch a lot, and you're right up there in the algorithms that come through with me that I enjoy, and then steal little bits from and sell as my own opinion. So I do appreciate that, because it makes me sound smarter than I am.
That's the way it works.
It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Tell people where they can find you. The Majority Report on YouTube.
Yeah, you can go to YouTube. I think if you Google Majority Report YouTube, you'll find it. I think the official one is like I think the URL is youtube.com/Sam Seder. But if you Google Majority Report Sam, you'll find it.
And
I've been doing this for so long now that it's just
we are one of the official fan clubs of Emma Vigeland. She's great.
Yeah, she's great.
Talking about Israel and Gaza before, she's almost my lead for finding out information about Israel and Gaza. She's amazing. So
yeah,
thanks once again for coming on. Really appreciate your time, and all the best for the next couple of weeks.
Thanks, Pat. You too.
All right, guys, that's us. That's Sam Seder. Great conversation. To be honest with you, I could have talked to Sam for another hour. And yeah, we'll try and get some more commentators along in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, in the US, this is their busiest time coming up to the election. So probably chances of getting one of the other guys or girls is slim, but I'll give it a go, see what we can bring to you over the next couple of weeks. And of course, Tuesday week, I think, is the American election. So Wednesday week, our time. So I'm sure that week, that first week of November, we'll be focusing quite a bit on what's happening in the US as well. If you enjoyed tonight's show, then that's a bit of a focus for you. Just a quick reminder that if you like what you've seen, if you want to be a part of what we do, if you want to support us, then you just need to head to patreon.com. There we go. I got it. /Big Hairy News. And that's the way to be a part of what we are. Lots of little perks and bonuses like early access to some of the interviews, like today's interview. Also, your name gets mentioned in the credits. And as it's time to wrap up the show, as you can see, Nala is already asleep, even though it's not nighttime when I'm recording this. Got it. It's time for us to leave. Thank you once again, and we'll all see you Tuesday night live, because Monday night's a public holiday. Tuesday night live from 9 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News. Hooroo.